Yeah, we have more people here. I want to thank everyone for being here today. We had some technical difficulties, so we're getting off to a late start. But thank you for sticking with us and being here today. Curtis is here for part 2. He did our first tree talk several weeks ago, probably 5 or 6 weeks ago. And he is here again to talk more about plant health care for trees and shrubs. And it seems like y'all can't get enough of that. And I don't know that I can get enough of it either, because there's just so much to learn. Every day it goes, everything happens. I just keep learning more and more and more. So we have our second round of we have our first virtual volunteer forester class happening right now, but this will be my second time going through the class, and I just continue to learn more. So I don't think we can ever get enough of this. So Curtis, thank you for your patience, and thank everyone for their patience. And I appreciate your being here today. So I'm just going to read a little something here. If your mic is on, go ahead and turn that off so we don't get feedback, or like in my case, a dog that barks and or cats that meow. So Curtis Casciano, the owner of Consultree, is a certified arborist and a member of the International Society of Arboriculture. I can never say that, arboriculture, since 1998. Curtis, a graduate in forestry from the University of Tennessee, has 20 years of experience in tree care and enjoys working with the trees and the people of East Tennessee. His company, Consultree, is a plant health care company based in Knoxville, but it services the greater area that provides a holistic approach to landscape care. They utilize the least toxic and up-to-date methods of pest control, focusing on the optimum health and beauty of your landscape through proper tree and shrub pruning, insect and disease management, fertilization, and tree preservation. So since we're running late, I'm going to go ahead and post his website in the chat bar. If you don't know how to get to the chat bar, if you hover down at the bottom, there's a little area there that says chat. Click on that, and your chat box will pop up. And then if you want it to be off to the side, like I like mine, you hit the exit full screen button, and it'll pop up on the side, so you can watch everything and also monitor the chat section. So if you have any questions, that's a great place to put them. If you don't have access to chat, just unmute your mic. It just happens. All right, Curtis, you're on. Thank you for being here today, and thank you so much for your patience.
So last time we discussed, I'll just do a quick overview. Last time we discussed tree health and shrub health, and we talked about our hardiness zone, and then we also discussed the different cultural controls, where to install your plants properly based on the wind and sun and soil structure. We talked about overcrowding. We talked about plant depth, and we talked about what it means to overmulch / volcano mulch. We also discussed water cycles, the proper water establishment for your trees, and then also we discussed fertilization as well. And then the last thing we went over, which was planting with diversity, and that was just, a long story short, don't plant the same thing over and over and over again in case we do have something, tragic happens, such as the boxwood blight come in and wipe out all your boxwoods. But if you have planted, boxwoods, Japanese hollies, cotoneaster, some other things, you wouldn't have had that. And also it aids in insect and disease care as well, giving your host or your beneficial insects a place to feed other than just one source. So that was a very short version of what we went over last time. So today we're going to discuss what causes our insect problems. The first is a susceptible plant. Each plant is different and susceptible to different pests. We often see the phrase on a plant tag that says disease-resistant crabapple. And then people are like, oh, I'll get that because it's a disease-resistant. But what disease is it resistant to? Is it rust? Is it scab? No one is both, believe it or not. They don't really have one that's both. There's some that are kind of good at one and really poor at others. So disease resistance is nice. So it's important that you research and find out what disease are we resistant to. Like, for instance, our crepe myrtles. I've seen a few things on Facebook, which always cracks me up about people saying, don't crepe myrtle it. and because it causes powdery mildew. Well, if you get a non-powdery mildew resistant, or if you get a powdery mildew resistant plant, I know this is going to sound awful, but you can still crepe murder them and it not cause powdery mildew. So it's disease resistance. If you don't want powdery mildew, buy a plant that says does not get powdery mildew. Now, it does seem like the powdery mildew resistant crepe myrtles are susceptible to leaf spot. So once again, pick one which is worst in your area. Say, okay, I know that powdery mildew is bad here, and I'll get a resistant plant as a result. So that's one major thing that I really wish people would do more, is pick the proper plant for, the area that you're in and least susceptible. Another problem that causes, I'm checking the chat box periodically too. So Tracy, it's not going to hurt my feelings if you say missing a question. Another issue that causes plant problems are weak or damaged plants. You can have a cherry laurel and put it in the perfect place and do everything right. And, you mow your lawn the first time and decide I'm going to get as close as I can with that weed eater, hit the side on one side, 2 weeks later, hit the opposite side, and then you give me a call a week later and say, why does my cherry laurel look so poorly? And then I'm just going to come in and say, you damaged it with your weed eater, which I did the other day, which was so awful to have to do to a gentleman who put in 15 of them and talked to me about all the labor he did, everything he did right. And then what did he do wrong? He decided he was going to get all the weeds as close as possible, and he killed 80% of them. So weak or disease or damaged plants. Another thing that is, weakness can be caused by overwatering. Weakness can be caused by being, going back to our cultural controls, putting them in too much sun when they're a shade tolerant plant, or vice versa, putting them in too much shade when they're a sun tolerant plant. So I'll go back to, and I'll always pick on Leyland cypress because they're so easy to pick on. So going back to our Leyland cypress, a lot of people say, especially right now because of our drought from last year, they'll call me up and say, why did my Leyland cypress look so poorly this year? And I'll look at them and say, well, you planted them in the shade. They're a shade tolerant plant, or not a shade tolerant plant. They'll say, but I want them as a screen. Well, wanting them as a screen is different than putting them where they can function as a proper screen. By putting them in the full sun, you can allow them to do better. So by putting them in the proper place, you will not weaken the plant. And that's what I try to get people to understand. What you do by overwatering, planting them in the improper place, or underwatering, you're what weakens the plant. There are many factors that you can control that can keep you from getting insects and diseases, because many of our diseases, especially fungal, are just secondary pests and problems that occur only when a plant is, stressed. Now, obviously, there are natural stresses such as, we get too much winds from a hurricane, or we have, a really cold winter that we didn't quite expect. That can weaken them as well. And, that's why when we went over the proper fertilization or care of your plant, if you're doing all of that, then you should be, okay for the most part. Then another factor that causes insect problems are abiotic factors, such as wind, lightning, and mechanical damage to trees. A lot of people don't think about wind. Many of our trees that are used for windbreaks, such as, once again, I'll go back to my friend the Leyland cypress, they really don't like the wind in the summer. You may think they're a good block. They are a good block, but they really don't like our summer winds because it causes them to constantly, respire and just never really get their water right. And after a nice wind event from a hurricane, I use that a lot because that's what they tend to be in late summer into early October when it's our driest months. And then when you add wind to it, you pretty much dry out the leaves and needles, and it's hard for the plants to, keep their stomatas at the proper, open point so that they say, all right, I'm supposed to be absorbing oxygen at this rate, but with the winds being at 70, 80 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour as sustained winds, or having winds for 40 miles per hour and when it's 95 degrees is really hard on them, and then can cause them to have, that's a wind damage. Lightning is another abiotic factor that A lot of people don't always get right. I'll often see where a white oak is struck and the white oak has very little damage, but then 6 doors down, I have a red oak that's struck and it's completely dead. And if you've ever split wood, you feel like Hercules when you split red oak, and you feel like, olive oil when you split white oak, because the way that their rays are crossed, that's how when they deal with lightning, they can throw lightning more likely in a white oak, whereas a red oak takes it and lets it run straight down to the root system and destroy the tree. Another thing that people don't think about, that is the amount of water that's in a tree when lightning strikes it. Think about putting your tree in a microwave, or a portion of your tree in a microwave, and that's what's happened to it. And just like with anything else, when lightning strikes, it runs to ground, and you may actually lose a tree or shrub, 6, 7, 15 feet away, because the roots were touching it, and that's where the ground, focused, and it will zap that plant. I've seen that before as well. And then the last abiotic factor that I'd like to go over is mechanical damage, once again with the weed eaters. That's a problem. And then the other major problem we have is, when people put in new homes, or one of my least favorite things in the world, I know it may surprise you, but I hate grass. Grass is nothing but the anti-tree. And so when you put in grass, people are like, oh, I want nice, pretty sod. So they hire somebody and they scrape the soil and they take off our nice roots on the top surface. Then they put in the evil grass, and the evil grass does nothing but absorb our water and prevents new roots from occurring. And that's a mechanical damage when you scrape like that. And then you add another factor of, hey, less water, even though you're putting more water down, but you have greedy grass on top of it. Another problem major thing that causes insect issues is non-native plant selection. A lot of people are, and I'm just as bad as anybody else. I've got an orange tree sitting on my back porch. It's beautiful. It lives in a pot, and I bring it in the winter. But the spider mites destroy it. And I, being a plant healthcare person, honestly let it happen because I want to eat the fruit. And so I can treat it with a horticultural oil, but that's about it. And you can't really treat a horticultural oil in the summer when it's 95 degrees at 90% humidity without burning your leaves. So non-native plants are, a big problem. And I hate to go back to the Leyland cypress again, but technically Leyland cypress don't really like our Knoxville. It can get a little too cold for them. They're just not that they can't handle our zone. It's just that, if you live in Knoxville, like I've lived here for now 15 years, I have gotten rid of all of my coats and my big heavy winter jackets that I used to have when I lived in DC, because one, they're out of style, and I'm not going to go buy another one because I don't need it in Knoxville. The trees do the same thing. They realize after 2 and 3 years of no longer needing, 60% antifreeze, they can drop down to 30% antifreeze. And then when the really, really cold winters come, they just don't acclimate to that very well. So Leyland cypress are technically zoned out of Knoxville because of that. But for the most part, they do pretty darn good here. I think we've had maybe 2 years where they did really poorly. And then after you have a really, really cold winter like that, they tend to not grow very well. And then you get our secondary problems like Cercospora or Ceridium canker or Botchiosphaera canker or any other disease that sets in on them. I'm trying to think of another non-native plant that people love to use around here that just native plants do better here, but I know another that's really good, which was
Curtis. It's not native and can be kind of isn't butterfly bush something that's used a lot that can be kind of.
It is, but to me, a butterfly bush doesn't. I'm not going to say I don't care about them, but the reason I don't care about them is because they don't have any insect problems or disease problems. Oh. But they are non-native that we don't want around here because of the fact that they supersede and outcompete our natives. That's for that aspect. You don't want to do that, but there are plenty that now I will to give butterfly bush propagators credit. Many of our butterfly bushes do not seed anymore. The old big blue ones that we used to see around, yes, they seed quite a bit, but a lot of our newer ones don't seed as much, and they are sterile. But what I was going to say, another non-native one that just got zapped by the cold were our Indian hawthorns around here. They're a small shrub that people love to use as, parking lot, but they absolutely despise our winters when it even gets the slightest bit cold. I went to Miami one time and I thought, wow, those are a beautiful bush down there. And those were Indian hawthorns. And the last I checked, it's not the same temperature in Miami as it is in Knoxville. So go with your more closely native zoned plants, more or less. And then another problem that causes our insect issues are lack of care / cultural controls. And it's going to go back to the volcano mulching again. You volcano mulch it, you cover the stem with mulch, makes it more susceptible to borers, makes it more susceptible to having a girdling root, therefore causing it to be, stressed. And then ambrosia beetles can attack, and spider mites can attack. Lots of things can attack. But another problem that when it comes to lack of cultural control, a lack of care and cultural control is, I go back to watering. If I had my way, I would start everybody's property at 0 water until I heard someone screaming about the drought. I would try not to water as much as possible. Everybody always tells me about their hydrangeas. My hydrangeas are constantly wilting in the afternoon. That's a defense mechanism. They're supposed to do that. So when you check your hydrangeas, is only in the morning, and when the relative humidity is typically lower and our temperatures are lower. If they're wilting in the morning, water them. If they're wilting in the afternoon, check them in the morning. So overwatering is such a problem. It's not only for Knoxville, it's everywhere that has plenty of water availability. We tend to water more than most, and because of our soils having such high colloidal properties that don't allow good drainage, it's even more of a problem here. I would say on average once a day, I ask my client or prospective client, is it okay if I pull this plant out of the ground? They look at me like I'm crazy, because there's no way I'm going to be able to pick this massive tree up or shrub out of the ground. And normally I can do it with one hand because all the roots are completely rotten. Many times people send me a picture and say, what's wrong with my plant? And it's yellow. Oh, so I put iron on it. Okay, sounds good. I put this on it. Oh, it sounds like a good idea. But if you don't have the root system because you've rotted it because of all the water, you can put anything you want on it. It's not going to absorb anything. So one of the triggers that a lot of people miss is if you use a systemic insecticide on a plant, and if you use, let's say you have 2 plants side by side, and you use the same amount, and they're the same size, and you use the same amount of systemic insecticide on both plants, one still gets the insect problem and the other one does not, then people are like, oh, you didn't put enough product down. The first thing I go to is the amount of root system. The plant will not absorb it and distribute it throughout the canopy if it does not have the proper root system. So that's often a common misconception. People are like, oh, I didn't put enough product down. It's actually because your plant won't take it up. I can put down pounds and pounds of product. If it doesn't take it up, because there's no root system. And that often happens with our boxwoods in the wintertime. If you see these bronze boxwoods in the winter, yes, that is natural, but it's supposed to green up a little bit as the spring goes on. If it doesn't do that, or it takes its time, that tells me right there that that plant does not have a root system that can support it. So that's my water spiel. I cut off more water in this city than you could ever imagine. I save people's water bills tons. And then another problem factor that causes insect problems is improper planting and mulching. Planting depth is often wrong, more times than not. So the planting depth is important. And it's a funny saying, and at this point to me the saying is plant high in East Tennessee. And that means plant high in the soil. Don't go out and get burned up before you plant a plant, is what it's saying. Don't go out and smoke a bunch of meth. It means plant high in the soils. So if you plant high in East Tennessee, your plants will be able to allow the water to get off of them. And it'll allow if you plant low, then it just makes a big giant terracotta bowl and your water can't go anywhere. So plant high in East Tennessee. And then mulching. I tend to be more against mulching than for. I think mulching, the way that we have our beds should be for one purpose primarily, I shouldn't say only, and that is for aesthetic purposes only. You should factor that in first. How it looks is is what's most important, because mulch does cool the soils down quickly, retains moisture, but a maple tree with a 1.5 foot mulch ring around the base of it doesn't do any soil, it doesn't do any moisture retention, it doesn't do any soil cooling whatsoever. It's just there to keep your weed eater away and to look good. So remember that, and don't pile up so much mulch. So when it comes going back to mulching in general, if I had someone say to me, I mulch or not to mulch, 9 times out of 10 I would say don't mulch, because you're going to mulch improperly. If you take the time to do it right, okay, great, mulch, because it's nice. But most of the time people put too much mulch down. After the 4th inch of mulch, you are now into the decomposition layer. And that 5th inch, which is the beginning of roots, are just doing that. They're in decomposition mode. They're burning. So you've done more harm than good. So that's why I go with, if you don't have to mulch, then don't. But if you can mulch properly, obviously I want you to do that. But it's very rarely that people mulch properly. If I could walk you around, out of 10 properties, I'd say 9.5 of them get it wrong. Landscapers included, unfortunately. I mean, they sell it by the yard. They don't sell it by the plant. So improper planting and mulching is another problem that causes insect and disease problem. So now going on to problem solving steps. So if you have a problem, here is how you should go about the problem, or go about solving the issue. I always say finding a problem is like being a detective. You have to know how to ask the right questions, how to ask the same question to a person that is stated differently, but get you the answer that you think you need. The other day I had an instance where I was met with I met a tree guy, and he explained to me that he used an injectable fungicide on his elm trees. And I was like, oh, very, very good. But why, was my thought. Why would you do that? Because this is not a problem. That's not, the disease he's describing cannot be cured by this injectable fungicide. So then he told me about it, how it perked back up and it did this and did that. And I was like, oh, it sounds like he's doing something okay, but I couldn't figure out exactly what it was. Come to find out, he was not injecting it with a fungicide. He was injecting it with a fertilizer. And then he was wondering why 6 weeks later the tree was going from being perfect to burning up, because he was burning it up. So I asked him the question 4 or 5 times in different ways, and he kept on circling back and giving me the same answer. So the homeowner happened to be there, and she called me the next day and said, just wanted to let you know that is not what he was using. He was using fertilizer. So you can ask all the questions you want, but if they're not willing to give you the answer, then once again, there's only so much you can do. So the detective work is asking the right questions. I'll give you one more little funny one, which was hilarious to me the other day. I asked a couple who had a maple tree that was 15 feet from their driveway. And the first question I asked was, how recent was the disturbance in the soil to this tree? Because all the other trees on the property were perfectly fine. And they said, oh, we've lived here 22 years and we've done nothing to disturb the soil. I said, okay, so no new sod, didn't overseed it, didn't do that. No. Went on, okay, sounds good. So we've talked about the tree, looked at the problem, and I knew there was a root disturbance. Just knew it was there, but just couldn't figure out what it was. 2 minutes before I walked off the property, the wife turned to the husband and said, do you think us redoing the driveway 4 years ago had any effect on that tree? And he said, oh yeah, I didn't think about that. The tree was 15 feet from the drive, and they probably cut 60% of the roots on that side. So then, once again, I asked the question, but I did not circle back to it. So problem solving steps. The first step to solving a problem is properly identifying your plant material. Most people ask me what's wrong with their pine tree. The first thing I say to them, even on the phone, do you mean leyland cypress? And they say, oh yeah, that's what it was. It's a leyland cypress. So you have to have the proper plant material. So you cannot identify a sycamore disease on a river birch. This is the most crucial step. If you can't identify the plant, you cannot identify the problem properly. You might get close, but not exactly. And then the second part of it is accurately identifying the signs and symptom of the disease of the plant. When I'm doing this, I have done this for a long time, and I can tell you what a birch is supposed to look like in July. I can tell you what a birch is supposed to look like in August. And but I always tell people when I go to their home, maple tree always look like this, and they always say, oh, well, maybe. Well, this is the first time you've ever looked at it. This is the first time I've noticed it. So I always say to people, if you had a big, giant growth on the side of your face and never noticed it, then you know what? You probably have a new big, giant problem on the side of your face. But if that was there since birth, it might be a birthmark. It might not. So it's know you're normal. Every tree is different. Every person is different. Know you're normal. You know, if you all of a sudden look in the mirror and you're bald, I bet you'd have noticed that over the 15 years that it took you to bald. But if you didn't notice that, then you have a problem. Something has changed dramatically. And that's the same thing with trees. You look out at your tree and all of a sudden notice, that tree is leaning at a serious angle. Has it been doing that its whole life? Because the fact that it was hit by a truck 15 years ago and sits at an angle, like there is one on Ebenezer just like that. It got hit by a truck 10 years ago and that thing sits at an angle still to this day. I can't wait for them to call me and ask me, why is this tree at an angle? I can't wait to tell them that because it's there. So know the normal. Without knowing the normal, you can't know the abnormal. I have a really nice Japanese maple on one of my properties. I love it. I absolutely love this tree. It is perfect purple in the spring, and within a month, hold on, I have to read my text really fast. Hold on, I've got employees out in the field. Okay, but this cultivar, and I've never found it, I don't know what it is, but this tree goes red like fall senescence within a month of leafing out. It's the most gorgeous Japanese maple, and I said to the homeowner the first time I was there, oh my gosh, we've got to fix this tree. Something's wrong with your tree. I'm so sorry. Her name's Jerry. I'm so sorry, Jerry. I don't know what's wrong with your tree. And she's like, what do you mean what's wrong with my tree? And I said, I've never seen a tree go red like this, in April. And she's like, oh no, that's what it always does. It's done that since I've owned the tree. And I was like, so that's its normal. Know it's normal, and you'll be able to figure out what the abnormal is. So that's a huge part for diagnostics. When I'm working with my other arborist here on staff or any of my technicians, I often say to them, don't directly jump to a conclusion just because you see something on the plant that's not quote unquote abnormal. It might be a cultivar. With all these new fancy cultivars out there, the wacky, there's if anybody knows what the anise plant is, anise is a great, Elysium parviflorium is a great local native to Florida plant that does so good here. But there's a new one, I think it's called like banana something. It's bright yellow. It looks like it needs more iron than you could ever imagine, but it's supposed to be that way. It drives me crazy when they're on my properties because I just cannot stand it, but that's what they're supposed to look like. They're supposed to be bright yellow. There's a lot of azaleas and rhododendrons that have fuzz all over their leaves, which normally means we have some powdery mildew issues, but that's what the desired look is. There's often dots and stuff like that. So knowing the abnormal will aid you in knowing the abnormal. After that, after knowing accurately identifying the true signs and symptoms of your pest, then you'll be able to determine whether or not the wilting, weeping, bleeding, stifling, chewing, or any chlorosis is what is abnormal and as a result of the pest. So those are all symptoms that we see that are typically caused by the actual insect. So if you know the normal, then you'll be able to figure out, oh, look, that's not supposed to have a big giant chunk out of the side of the leaf from the Japanese beetle. So knowing that, it'll get you a long way. And then the next step is to properly identify the actual insect. This can be determined a couple of ways. The first and easiest way is to find the insect. Look around. Don't just look at your tree and say, oh no, there's holes in the leaves. Walk up to that tree and look for what's eating the leaves. You will most likely find that. If you don't find it during the day, walk out there at night and do the same exact thing. Because a lot of our pests, like weevils, feed at nighttime. Some of our caterpillars feed at nighttime, and they're just going in and hiding from the sun during the day. So take a look around, and you actually might find the actual insect. Because then once you've determined, if you can't find the insect, then you just have to either call a professional or start playing on the internet and typing in the symptoms and signs and say, oh, this is Japanese beetle, or this is aphids, or this is lace bugs. And once you find the actual cause, then it's time to think about, how do I treat and control this? Because you might be able to purchase beneficial insects that will help you control it. And you might have found something on your plant that is the beneficial insect that is actually controlling it for you. A lot of times people will say, look at this plant, what's wrong with it? I found this bug on it, this is what's eating it. And then in reality, the bug that was eating it has already been eaten by like a praying mantis or something like that. So then once you determine what the actual pest is, you can treat, be it with insecticide, fungicide, miticide. You can treat. We had a client the other day call us up, and everything she did, everything she saw, from a wilt to a flower to a hole, she treated with malathion. And I just explained to her the benefits and disadvantages to malathion. She kept saying to me, every time I spray the back, the front just looks awful. And I'm like, wait a second, the front of your property looks bad after you spray the back? She's like, yes. So I was like, are you spraying them at the same time? No, it's a problem. I always have a problem 1 week in the back, then the next week in the front. 1 week, and I was like, what are you treating with? Malathion. Okay. So what she's doing is she's blanket spraying everything, killing all the beneficials and the harmful insects as well. And then she's walking away. Whereas the harmful insects can reproduce so much faster that the next week, when she meandered out front, she's like, oh my gosh, they're on the front all over the place. The damage was there again. And so she'd blanket spray that, and you're just zeroing out everything the entire time. So by actually using a targeted miticide, insecticide, or fungicide that's truly designed for the one, you will save more beneficials. And also, by not blanket spraying, you will, when the praying mantis is sitting on the azalea eating your lace bugs, and you're spraying your boxwoods for mites, you didn't damage the praying mantis. So by knowing the insect and finding the true target, read the label. Every new pesticide we get, I make every one of my employees, we make a copy of that label, and I make every one of my employees take it home and we read it. And then a week later, 2 weeks later, heck, a month later, I'll just walk up to them and say, what's the best control for this? And if they'll say, oh, this, and I'll say, what's your rate? And we'll talk about the rates. So read your labels. It's really important. Those labels can say some of the most important things. On one of the things that when it comes to labels, that I try to get people to look at, especially when they buy this glyphosate that has Quick Pro, or has all, it says it'll kill it in 44 seconds, or it'll kill it in 3 weeks, or whatever the heck it's going to do. That's not going to be glyphosate necessarily. It's going to be a secondary product. And I want people to look at their label, because most labels on herbicides say one thing that's very precious to me: do not spray under trees. Do not spray near valuable plants. You would be surprised as to how many herbicides say that on the label. Every one of them but straight glyphosate should say that, just so you're aware. If you're ever spraying herbicide, just know that you should not be spraying underneath your trees. That's a little rant on herbicide. I'm not a big fan of homeowners spraying herbicide unless it is only glyphosate. I know everybody's against it because of the fact that it's all this cancer and this, that, and the other, but that's for someone who sprays constantly and doesn't protect themselves, in my opinion. So then, after properly identifying the pest, the next thing is monitoring the actual pest population. There's something called a threshold limit. If you have 15 azaleas and find one lace bug, it's not really worth it, in my opinion, to spray a toxic anything. Even if it's horticulture oil, it's just a waste of money. Don't want to spray unless you reach your threshold limit. Now, everybody has a different threshold limit. I personally would say I need to see a significant amount of damage on my personal plant, because I know I have a very diverse landscape, I would rather that they feed a little while, build up their population, and let my beneficials also build their population and then catch up to them and eat them. But some people have a very small threshold limit. They see one caterpillar and they want me to spray the whole tree. I have disappointed many a folk when I walk up to them and say, "Can I see my hand snips out of my truck?" I'll say, "Go grab," and I'll snip that caterpillar right out of it and step on it. I say, "There you go. There's your pesticide." And people are like, "Well, I want you to spray the whole tree." And I will say to them, "You show me the rest of the pest and I will spray the tree, but it's not necessary." So you have your threshold limits, and you have to understand. I understand chemicals very well. I've done this my entire adult life. And I would rather not spray and wait for the damage to occur later. Even if I spray with an insecticide for caterpillars, every spider in that tree is dead. And spiders are the good guys. Everybody hates those spiders, but they don't do anything but eat good stuff. So threshold limit, try to have a higher threshold limit than what you normally would. I mean, that's all I can say, because if you have 5 lace bugs, it's only going to feed 1 ladybug, 1 praying mantis for about an hour. If you have 1,000 lace bugs, yes, it's going to cause some damage to your plants, but it's also going to allow your natural ladybug population to build. It's going to allow your lacewings to build. It's going to allow your other beneficial insects to build. And then the next session, when you have, a mite show up on your boxwoods, they can migrate over there, your beneficials, and take down the mites, and you didn't even have to spray. And yes, you have some damage on your azaleas, but you don't have any damage on your boxwoods, and then going forward, you'll have a better beneficial garden. So that is where my company, I try to differ from everybody else. We do it's called integrated pest management, and that is a philosophy and a technique that we use that says we are willing to allow the threshold limit be a little bit higher, and we will spray the least toxic, least amount possible. People are always like, "Well, that just means you're saving on product." But my most expensive product is my employee. I pay them more than I pay for any product. And so if he has to walk around for an hour on a property to make a good inspection, I would rather him do that than spray every plant on the property and spend an hour dumping product and getting rid of all our beneficials. So IPM is if you have never heard that term, it's worth looking up and just seeing what integrated pest management kind of really means. It's more based on monitoring techniques versus spraying techniques. Once again, with your pests, understand its pest life cycle. People often call me in January and February and say, "I've got bagworms on my Leyland cypress." And I really want to say, "Good, go pick them off then," because they're not active, they're not feeding. And they're like, "Well, I want you to come and spray them." And I'm like, "I just did." And they're like, "What do you mean?" I did everything I could right there over the phone that would do just as much good as if I went out there and sprayed with the harshest chemical possible. And they often are like, "But I need you to spray them." And I said, "I'll spray them for you, but it has to happen after they hatch." Bagworms hatch in Knoxville around May 15th to June 15th, depending on our degree days. So I will not spray bagworms typically until the first week or second week of June. So know your life cycle and know whether or not you're one of the harder ones is like mites. Know whether or not it's a warm season mite or a cool season mite, because you can often have both on a plant, or you may only have one. And you can spray in February for both with an oil, and then when it comes March, you might get a warm season mite that hatches out a little early, or a cool season mite to hatch out a little late. So know your pests, know their life cycles, know that they go dormant. It's all about, to me, bang for your buck. If I can spend as little money as possible to get as much control as possible, that's the best strategy. And it doesn't mean for company-wise, I'm just saying for people in general, you should try to spend less on that, because if you can treat it at the right time, you can do it properly and kill less beneficials as a result. So knowing the life cycle, understanding when the best treatment time will give you the best control. Another thing, back to bagworms, if you spray bagworms on August 15th versus June 15th, or even June 1st, the rate, for an instance, there's a pyrethroid, which is one of our most common insecticides that people use. If you put down half an ounce of per 100 gallons, you can control the first instar of a caterpillar. That means the babies. When it's August 15th and they're in the fifth instar range, you have to go up to as high as 8 ounces per 100. People are like, oh, it's only 8 ounces. 8 ounces is a whole lot more than 0.5 ounces the last time I checked. So, and then you think about the toxicity level and range that you're in by putting down less product and killing them as young, and then also less damage occurs if you treat them when they're smaller. And so that kind of gets me to my last thing, which is choose your control products and application methods wisely. Once again, why spray in May for spider mites when they don't hatch out till the first week of June? If you know what your plant is, you should be able to quickly determine what your pests are going to be, and then you should be able to quickly pick out what your control strategies are, and then the best time to do that. So we have it's a quiz that I think is fun, but my employees probably think it's annoying, that I will say to them, I'll just walk up to them and say, dogwood. And their objective is to name the most common pest. And then you would think, oh, that's acceptable. But then my next question is, when is the most susceptible time for that common pest? And they think, oh, that's good, I answered that properly. And then the next step is, what is your best control time period? And what is your best control strategy? Okay, great. And then they'll give me that answer. And then I'll probably have another question for them as well. So you can always, every plant has a primary pest. As long as you know the plants on your property, the primary pest that gets on it, you should be able to treat your property pretty effectively in a very short amount of time and be able to enjoy your property without constantly spraying. So that as a whole is my 2-part series on how to control your insects and disease on your property. Any questions? And I will say, unfortunately, I have to leave about 1:05. So we have 8 minutes on my computer.
I want to thank everyone who showed up late. Sorry again, we're apologizing for our technical difficulties. It happens. It's computer stuff, right? So in the sidebar, you can ask questions in the chat section. If you just hover down at the bottom, the chat section will pop up, or just casual at this point, you can unmute your mic if you have a question. And I did record this tree talk, so I will have it on our YouTube channel and have all the information in the sidebar over there. So, or just email me. You guys all have my email and I'll send you the direct link. So if there's any questions, thank you again for your patience, everyone. Thank you for letting me in later. You're welcome, Jen. Sorry about that, really.
All right, looks like we're not going to have any questions. That's good. I must have done my job.
Yeah, you did great. It was really informative. Thank you so much, Curtis. Thanks for doing this for us again.
Sure.
Sorry again about the inconvenience.
No problem. That's no big deal. I know computer problems are not my specialty either. That's why I deal with trees and shrubs.
I know, right. I'm a tree person. I'm not a tech person.
Yeah,
I've just kind of been thrust into this role, as we move forward with these new guidelines in place. So got lots of thank yous over here, Curtis. Make sure you look at those. All right,
You're quite welcome, everybody.
Thank you for being here. I'm going to end the meeting, and I'll probably have this up by the end of the day. It takes quite a bit for me to get everything downloaded and then onto the YouTube channel. So if you just go to YouTube and put in the search title Trees Knoxville, our page will pop up too. So that's the easy way to do it. Good day, everyone. See y'all later, and I'll let you know when there's the next tree talk. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.